Hey everyone, welcome to First Builders. We're excited to have today's guest who has spent his career scaling the systems that move people, goods, and now information. From running maintenance for the Paris Metro to launching rail projects in Africa and Asia, and to leading fleet operations at Cruise during the rise of autonomous vehicles. He's been building at the frontiers of transportation and technology for over a decade.
And now, as co-founder and CEO of Quintess AI, he's bringing that same mindset to artificial intelligence, helping enterprises deploy AI responsibly and with confidence. Along the way, he's led scaling teams at autonomous farming company Burro, guided fleet strategy at Cruise, where we overlapped, and spent time in the Y Combinator ecosystem at Axflow. Prior to the startup industry, he spent almost a decade at RATP Dev, which is the world's largest public transport company, gaining deep industry expertise in the maintenance operations world.
We're thrilled to welcome Zacharie Esmili, a Fund2 portfolio founder, global builder, and now CEO of Quintess AI.
Zach, welcome to First Builders.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we'll just dive right in. So you've had one of the most global careers that we've featured on this show, starting with the rail systems in Paris and then later projects in South Africa, Algeria, and China. What did those early years teach you about building at scale?
Yeah, it was like a very formative time, I would say, for me. Just getting to see like a very different context, right? Like you don't work in China the same way you work in France, but you keep learning. I like essentially I learned to really adapt to my local situation. And knowing that like I wouldn't know everything on day one and just go with the flow and be fast at like delivering value. So that's kind of how I dealt with that time and things I still keep in mind today.
Adaptability is so important, and I'm sure you brought that with you into the startup world as well. And I'm curious too, because you made the jump from rail to autonomy, first with Burro in the agriculture side, and then at Cruise with Amber in transportation. What drew you into like autonomous, self-driving cars and robotics and things like that?
Yes, that was like actually my career with RATP. So some of the last projects I was working on were like multi-billion-dollar, like very big, like infrastructure, like essentially building a new rail line and then operating it for like say like several decades. And I realized that like it's a bit crazy to get those projects live. And I thought like there has to be another solution to increase like use of like public transport. And so that's when I got into like autonomy. And I was thinking of the time, oh, someone has to bring like autonomous trains, right? Like that would be so cool. But I realized that like, autonomous like vehicles, like cars would come first, and got very interested in that space while doing my MBA. I got an internship at Cruise. That was my first exposure to that industry. And yes, as you mentioned, like I joined a fantastic startup in Philadelphia called Burro, and it's still actively doing like autonomous robots for farming. It's actually one of the few success stories in the space. So yeah, it was a pretty cool time.
That's awesome. And what was it like jumping from an established legacy industry like rail to the world of early stage and growth stage startups? I mean, both of us have been inside of Cruise. It was like every day was a bit different. So every quarter, I feel like I was reinventing my whole self and mindset. Just curious how you managed that transition. And even for our listeners, like what was that like?
Yeah, I think, it's true, like rail is very established, right? Like, so, you are not going to reinvent how like people maintain like wheels or tracks or stuff like this, right? But in my case, because I was jumping from one country to another or one project to another, like it was constantly new. So I stayed like less than 2 years on most of those roles. I was used to like things changing a lot. Yeah, like one of my roles with RTP was actually like starting a new operations from scratch. So it's not too dissimilar from a startup. So it's I would say like I had some obviously like some aspects of my previous careers that would translate, but I think really like going to like very early stage startups. So when I joined Burro, it was seed. And for robotics companies, that means that like, okay, they had a product. I would say they almost had PMF because it was very clear that like customers wanted their product, but the product was still early, right? And it's robots. So it fails. So there was an aspect of it that was like more chaotic, obviously, than what I had seen in my previous career, and I had to adapt to that, and it was like a fantastic learning experience.
Yeah. What do you think was like most important to be able to adapt to in that environment, like going from growth stage, which was cruise, even though it was deep tech, in some ways it felt like we were still at pre-seed. And then
Yeah.
the other ways it was like we're a growth stage company pre-IPO at some points. Yeah, I guess for anybody who is making that jump, either deciding to found a company really early stage or joining a company that's really early, going from either growth stage or established, what do you think is kind of the most important trait beyond the adaptability itself?
Yeah, I would say like it's really like finding where you can bring value and deciding kind of for yourself and like then suggesting obviously like if that makes sense. But like I think that's a big difference, right? Like when you are the company like Cruise, thousands of people or more, obviously people stay more in their lane because otherwise it can't work and it's a lot more process oriented. I think it was kind of an in between, right? Like you say, like in many aspects it was very new and in some aspects it was a bit like big tech, whereas like an early stage startup, there are no processes. So you have to see, okay, where can I bring value today? What should I work on today that is going to really have an impact on the company? And I think like that was like super helpful to learn because as a founder, that's exactly the same mindset, right? Like you have an infinite number of topics you can tackle and you have to be very strategic.
Yep. And then at Cruise, you were leading technology or technical operations and scaling the fleet. What was it like trying to match vehicle software bring up with manufacturing output? And could you talk a little bit about what you were doing in that role, especially for our listeners that maybe aren't familiar with maintenance and repair operations or self-driving cars?
Yeah, totally. So I was part of the technical operations team at Cruise, so kind of the maintenance side of the house. Because Cruise is a tech company, we were really working, in my case, not so much on like the day to day, but like how can we improve things? So it was like, fantastic experience. But like, for instance, yes, we had a software stack that we had to run, like kind of like the operating system of the car. Early phase of the product, it was far from perfect. Like technicians would spend a lot of time like troubleshooting stuff. Part of my role was like leading a project with the engineering team to really significantly improve the reliability of that software. So that was one example, but like the whole point was we had just started like commercial operations and we had a cool product. We needed to turn it into a business, right? So if you remove the driver but you add so many people working on the car, you don't have a business. You just have a cool tech product. And so that was really about like bringing efficiency and cutting down cost and enabling like scaling as a fleet.
Awesome. So now you founded Quintess AI. What was the spark for starting the company, and how did your time at Cruise and Burro and RATP prepare you for building an AI?
Yeah, so I mean, earlier in my career, I really wanted to start my own company at some point. Actually, between my time at RATP and my MBA, I was like, I had a lot of ideas. I had mentioned like autonomous trains. That was one. I also wanted to like start a service a bit like VIA, like transit on demand, but for North Africa. So I had like some ideas like this, but it felt like, hey, I'm probably not the right person to start this kind of companies. Anyway, I was really thinking of, okay, at some point I want to start my own. And after Cruise, I joined a very early stage YC startup founded by two cruise engineers. We were essentially providing a tooling suite for people building with GenAI, so startups like Quintess. And so suddenly, me being on the business side, I got exposure to like hundreds of startup founders who were building like still like pretty early on in this whole journey, like early 2024, and realized like everything that we could do. Like it was a bit of a crash course. I would say Cruise was a bit like more like the traditional AI applied to autonomous vehicles. Gen AI is, I mean, there are a lot of similarities, but it's still different. And so I got to learn like everything that we could do. And at some point it was time for us to think of like a pivot. And so I had like hundreds of ideas of things I would do, like how I would leverage this technology to like really help my previous life, right? Like help maintenance leaders, and that's when I started to like start Quintess last year.
Wait, so how did you get from 100 ideas to Quintess? Is Quintess, would you say that it encompasses a lot of them, or that it was one where you felt like that one had better potential than the others?
Yeah, so indeed, I would say like the vision for Quintess of like really like boosting the efficiency of maintenance operation, especially like industrial scale maintenance, like cruise or RATP. I think all of my ideas were kind of around this. So the problem space. But then it was really like, okay, where do we start? And specifically, like our long-term vision is to become like some kind of like central operations for those companies, like really like controlling all aspects of their maintenance operations. You need to gain permission, right? Like a big company is not going to let you do that on day one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we started thinking about the system of record. So me and my co-founder, Julien, who's a great friend from my engineering school. And so they are very central to all those operations. And so we wanted to start like a new like AI system of record for maintenance. Realized that it's a very high bar to ask people to switch to a new system of record. And so we continued iterating a bit on the idea and landed on our current product, so it's a voice AI solution for technicians. It helps them like essentially do their work reporting in no time and like really remove all the burden. And on the other side, for managers, it gives them really like the clarity that they need in their data to know what's going on in the field. And so that's, I think, value prop was simple enough that it's something you can explain to your first customers and get them to adopt. And we don't ask them to like migrate from a system they've been using for 10 plus years.
Yep. And as you mentioned, like you're tackling basically enterprise adoption of AI, which is very challenging. What do you think are some of the mistakes that are being made in the industries right now that you're touching? Or maybe I should say like the lost opportunities, and what should be on your customers' minds as they're looking at all these potential solutions being pitched at them in the AI space?
Yeah, so I think obviously enterprise companies, like they're a bit like saturated with like all the pitches that they get from AI companies. So there is a bit of that. And I think like the reaction to that is thinking, is there immediate ROI for me to decide that this project is valid? And then I think that's kind of like overreacting a bit, because in a lot of scenarios, like, yes, there is some immediate ROI, and for our solution too. But like what is a lot more interesting is like the product vision and what we can build together over a longer period of time. And so I think like there is a bit of that risk of missing a great opportunity, something that is really going to boost their productivity just because they focus just on the immediate like next 3 months, right?
And how do you think about like building that, right? Because I mean, obviously it's going to take time. It requires trust from their side to you and all of that as well. Like, how do you think about building that, like with the technology and the vision and then all the stakeholders?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the key, at least for us at this stage, is to adapt our solution to like what is really top priority for them, right? Like essentially, we come with some idea of what could really help their operations, but they are closer to the ground and they know perfectly what is like really tricky for them to solve. And so at least that's what we do today, is like really adapt our solution to their workflows. So this way they get faster value, and then we can identify together what are the next steps, right? Like not like the 2-3 years roadmap, but more like, okay, in the next 6 months to a year, what do we want to achieve? What do you want to see? And then we build that. So it like in a sense, like we try to narrow it down, like you can't boil the ocean. So,
Right.
so just like focusing on what brings value in the medium term.
Yeah. And how do you manage from customer to customer? Like if two different customers have different high priorities areas, like do you find that if you build one for one customer, eventually the other customer is going to need it? It's just not their priority right now. Like how does that kind of translate as you're building a platform?
Yeah, totally. I think like where we have an advantage is because I've spent like close to 15 years in that space, I kind of have all those building blocks in my head. I know where we want to go. And so I'm like thinking, okay, well, if customer A is asking for this feature and I know that we were going to build it, it's just like, it's kind of like rearranging a bit of our roadmap. So I know that other people will have the same need because I had that need.
Yeah.
So and at several companies. So that's how I think about it. And then within the like maintenance world, obviously you have verticals like rail being one, but then you have also like specific set of customers who have like very similar needs. So we try to at first like stay within a few customers who have like very similar needs. So this way they all benefit from.
Yeah, and I feel like, I mean, hearing you talk about this, you're selling yourself short in terms of my question earlier on how you build trust with the stakeholders. Like clearly all of your experience and understanding what your problems were when you worked in this, like that's giving you such a great like framework and insight with with the customers that you're serving today, also with Quintess.
Yeah, and I would say like it's always good, like from time to time I reconnect with folks at Cruise, and they're like, oh yeah, like you're really like building the product we wish we had, right? So like this kind of feedback is always awesome, and I think like with customers today, it's really, I can't be an expert of all subsets of maintenance, but I do understand very quickly what they are talking about, and I think that gives us an edge. Like they don't need to translate their internal jargon or their practices. Like I'm there for that. And I do that translation with our tech team when needed, although like everybody is also like getting up to speed. So yeah, that's a pretty strong advantage for us.
That's really fascinating because I think a lot of new founders and new investors kind of underestimate the sort of niche cultures that exist inside of these industries and companies, even tech companies. The bigger they get, like the more jargon there is, the more there's a way that they do things, and you kind of everyone who works there learns how to work in that nuanced environment and that nuanced industry. So it definitely adds a lot of credibility if you can even leapfrog past like 20% of it. So that's cool.
Yeah, and I would say like sometimes because I speak the same language, I don't realize that it's jargon.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
and then I talk to my team, and some stuff that is obvious to me is not necessarily obvious to the rest of the team, and so that's when you realize that okay, I need to do some translation.
Yeah, this is the nuance. This is the thing to think about. Yeah, this is the definition.
Or like some, there are also like business constraints, operational constraints that are obvious to me, but they can feel arbitrary otherwise.
Totally. Yeah, totally agreed. Awesome. So would love to kind of hear a little bit about, like, especially for our listeners who are not aware, and frankly for myself as well, tell us a little bit about the day-to-day of the maintenance worker. Do they like talking to the voice AI? Are they getting used to it? Is it still kind of new to them?
Yeah. So that's so for sure it's new to them. So like a typical like maintenance worker, so where they work on a self-driving car or in a more like traditional industry like rail. So they do their work. They have to report their work at the end of their shift or at the end of the task, preferably, and they hit some hurdles in between. And so that's like when they have an issue, they have to escalate to somebody like their manager or some engineering team, and then they go back to work, or they don't have the part. So there is a lot of like, especially when you do repairs versus like preventive maintenance, there are a lot of like unknowns and things that can happen. So that's kind of the life of a maintenance technician, and it's some aspects are like similar to like a software engineer, like troubleshooting code, same type of steps. Today our product is focused more on like helping them like with the work reporting, so that the notes are perfect, and when they say they escalate to their engineering counterparts, the engineering team understands what needs to be solved and can help them faster, or like the manager has a much better idea of what are the problems that people are facing on the ground. But we also want to help them with those troubleshooting steps, right? Telling them like when they are stuck, instead of having to wait for whoever has the knowledge inside their company or outside, and sometimes it's like a supplier, if they could just ask Quintess as a first step, that's like fantastic, right? So that's what we are working on today. So from the point of view of like just getting used to voice AI, we see like a pretty good adoption, even like sometimes from like older folks who you would think are less receptive. And I think part of it is because we flip a bit the narrative. Typically, you are trying like, I mean, we are bringing a new technology, right, to a world where people are very set in their practices. But at the same point, they are today asked to use tools that are really not suited for their work. So imagine like you have greasy hands, or you are using some heavy equipment, and now you have to remove your gloves, probably like go to a wash station. And then finally go to the computer. It's far from ideal.
Yeah.
And so like talking to the AI, even though it's new and all, it fits better in the workflow. And that was our insight, having been there, like that like voice is so much better suited for that job. So yeah, I would say, we face like, an adoption curve, just like any new technology, but we benefit from the fact that our technology is better suited.
Yeah. No, it's so fascinating too. I've actually discussed this with Amber before, how it has parallels to how doctors use like their scribing AI and how it fits the workflow a lot better.
Yeah.
They also need their really important structured clinical notes, in the EHRs. And so, yeah, when we were even discussing this deal early on, that was one of the, I was like telling her, I was like, oh my gosh, like, cause I come from a healthcare background. So I was like, this is very interesting from like a parallel, like workflow perspective.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say it was also interesting because in healthcare, we see that type of deal a lot. Like there are a lot of voice AI agents, but there aren't as many in maintenance and repair. So it was actually really interesting that like in some sectors, it's really taken off and it's almost like overdone. And then in others, it's completely, hasn't even existed yet and is a really interesting entrance point in.
Yeah. And obviously there are reasons for that. One of them is, you have to deal with like big enterprise customers.
Yeah.
It
works out once you're in the door.
Yeah.
So, but I think like it's interesting because to me maintenance is like it's healthcare for equipment, right?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing. And coming from maintenance, I see it the other way around. Like to me, going to the doctor is just maintaining my body. Right?
I love that analogy.
So it's not too surprising that you have like similar needs in those two industries, and they are both like record keeping is huge in both cases because it's safety. It's very very similar in that aspect. In the long run, because we tend to like our solution is used in a context of more like many to many interactions where you have many different technicians working on many different assets. There is even more of a need of like coordination in large companies on maintenance. So I think like, the first problems are similar. After that, we have some very exciting stuff that we can solve that are probably harder to solve in the healthcare industry. So anyway, I'm very bullish for, like the application of AI to the maintenance world.
Yeah. I love that you touched on like that large coordination required within companies for maintenance, because I think a lot of people that haven't worked in a physical operation in one of these industrial sectors or ever seen maintenance may not realize how massive of an industry that is, just because even when I worked in manufacturing for consumer electronics at companies like Apple, it would be like there's an entire team just for one product. For iPhone, there would be an entire team just focused on identifying all the equipment, assigning an age to each piece of equipment that was going to be used to produce the iPhones, and then designing like a preventative care and maintenance plan which essentially is the maintenance plan for those pieces of equipment. So every piece of equipment has like a recurring, healthcare plan, if you will.
Exactly.
So it's very similar, and it is huge. It's massive. So, and these pieces of equipment are really expensive, and they all have depreciation timelines and end of life. And if you can extend that life, you can save a lot of costs. So it applies to everything from like rail to equipment inside of factories to defense. Like there's all sorts of stuff. So I appreciate you kind of sharing the insight on like how it looks for the maintenance worker as well. Yeah.
And I would say another big aspect of maintenance is avoiding downtime. So if it's a manufacturing line, it's super obvious. But it's the same, right? Like you don't want the plane to be down when it has to take off with hundreds of passengers. Yep. So there are a lot of high stake aspect of maintenance because of that. Nobody wants their assets to be down.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to switch gears a little bit and chat through kind of how your leadership has evolved, right? You've gone from managing maintenance teams, especially like on the rail side and obviously at Cruise and such as well, and then now running a venture-backed startup. Yeah, how do you think like your style has really evolved?
Very interesting, like, very different. I would say, I started my career in a very like blue collar environment where on top of that I was like 24 and the manager, and it's kind of funny, right? Like when you manage people who could be your parents essentially. So I think it's kind of the same thing of like being like like adapting your style to the environment. So I learned very early on to be humble. Like I was managing people who knew a lot more than I did about the work. Like in this case, like they knew everything about the equipment that we had to maintain. And then moving more into tech, it was obviously a lot less hierarchical, more like managing by influence, right? Specifically when you work with engineering, like product teams that are not, even in the same hierarchy. So that was an aspect where I had to really change style. And then early stage startups, it's a whole new beast, right? It's really about creating a team, selling the mission, explaining very clearly why we work on something, and things keep changing and priorities are changing every day, and explaining all of that. At least that's my philosophy. I'm still learning, right? I don't pretend I know everything about startup leadership, but I think because it can be a bit chaotic, and it's important for the leadership to really explain what's going on and why we are doing what we do.
Yeah. And regarding that chaos, you've worked on 3 continents across industries most people never get to touch, and at company sizes that are quite different. So what kind of grounds you outside of work?
Oh yeah, my family, I would say, and I'm very fortunate. I think you need to have some stability in your life. And I think it was also part of me of when I decided that, oh yes, that was really the time, is when I had some financial stability and really perfect life on the private side. And so I think that's really important. I get a ton of support from my wife. I have a beautiful daughter. It helps when I get super stressed about the future of Quintess and all the customers and all of that. It's really important to have that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I would love to hear also, I mean, obviously, the personal life and having a lot of the stability there, but is there anything that about you, whether it's a passion or a habit or anything else that doesn't usually show up in your founder bio that you want to share with our listeners here?
Yeah, I'm a man of few hobbies, so I don't have a ton to share here.
Quintess is the hobby, right now.
Exactly.
The company takes up all your hobby time.
I enjoy running and cycling,
Nice.
and just being in nature. I think I live in San Francisco. We have beautiful nature around, and that really helps me. I take some of my meetings as walking meetings in the park,
Those
and
are the
that
best,
really helps.
by the way. It just, and there are those studies too that show that if you're actually walking while having a meeting, you're just way more creative and way more just calm and tranquil and everything else as well.
Yeah, and I do that a lot with my co-founder, also because we've known each other for now close to 20 years. So
Nice.
He knows me. He doesn't need to see me on camera. Yeah, I totally agree with you. It helps us being creative and thinking about how we solve some of the hardest challenge.
Yeah, what keeps you motivated when you're building in spaces that are uncertain, high risk, and often under scrutiny?
Yeah, for me, it's really I think I have that one opportunity to build something that I would really have wanted back then in my whole career, right? And that, I think it's very unique. First, many people start their company right after school or something like this. Right? I have that opportunity that I faced a lot of challenges for most of my career. That was just how things were, right? There was nothing you could do about it, right? For instance, technicians would complain all the time that they hated doing their reports. I would tell them, hey, I need this data. So please do it, right? There was really no answer to that problem. Or the answer would be some clunky mobile app that is not helpful in any way. And so that's just an example. Everything that essentially all the challenges I faced, or searching for parts for hours because it's very hard to find, or stuff like this, that we can now solve with our solution. I mean, that's really exciting. And then sharing that vision with customers, saying that, yes, they've seen the same problem, that they also want to solve it, and working together. Yeah, that's fabulous. So that's really what keeps me motivated.
That's awesome. And what do you think is the most underrated skill for founders?
Yeah, I would say determination. And I don't know if it's the most underrated, but something that we tend to forget is it's never easy. So you really have to push through. And I think some people kind of expect like super early success, especially like now in the AI world, right? Like you think that of course everybody wanted your product and you will, like I think specifically when you bring AI to like more traditional companies that like work at their own pace and so on, just knowing that, hey, you know what vision you have, you know that it's shared by many customers and you need to just execute on this. I think it's very powerful because, otherwise you can just, decide to pivot to the next idea, right? Like, or copy, like, like, oh yeah, this company has been super successful with voice and sales. Let's do this, right? Yeah. So I think like being very, very clear on why you are doing it and sticking to it is very powerful.
Awesome. Well, now we're actually at the point where we're going to transition into our rapid fire playbook. So we have a few questions for you. Just, feel free to answer with like the first thing that comes to mind for you. And I will let Amber kick us off.
What's one tool or habit that you rely on every day?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of tasks. So, I mean, for me, specifically as a CEO, I think like, you can really be overwhelmed with everything that needs to be done in like very different buckets. And so I just have all my tasks on my calendar, and it's really good for me to keep track of everything.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's nothing like crossing those off when you've got like so many work
Yes.
streams
It
going.
feels the best way to do that.
Yeah.
What's one book, podcast, or mentor that shaped how you lead?
Yeah, I think mentor definitely. My first mentor when I joined RATP, so a long time ago, right, really helped me lead with while being humble. And yeah, I think that's just something that you can keep wherever you go. And it was, as I mentioned, like particularly needed when you are a young engineer managing like very experienced folks. But that has been useful since then.
And what's one thing you used to believe about leadership that you no longer do?
I think I used to believe that leaders would have things figured out. Like when you're on the other side, it seems like, oh yeah, they're so good. And then obviously when at a company things become more chaotic, you see that even like the best leaders can fumble. And so, yeah. And now obviously being in charge, like I know that I don't know everything, but that I'm doing my best and trying to learn as much as I can to lead the company in the best direction.
That's awesome. That's a really good one. Awesome. And then if you had a magic wand, what's one thing that you'd fix? Let's say you get 3 wishes. What's one thing you'd fix for yourself, one thing for Quintess AI, and then one thing for the broader AI ecosystem?
I'll start with Quintess. I would love if all maintenance leaders in the world knew about us, because when I get inbound, I love it so much. So and part of it is just that product discovery, right? Like we are small, and so people don't know that there is a solution to their problems. So that's one. For myself, I mean, yeah, I wish I had a little more time to run more. Just like time is limited, and exercising is really good. And remind me, what was the last one?
The broader AI ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, well, if we could have significantly better financial models, that would be great. So, I mean, like I think when you apply AI to like really like the physical world, you hit limitations faster, I would say. Yeah, I wish AI understood better. Now, I mean, that's part of our craft, right? But we really have to know what to tell the AI without overloading it. Like it's not yet that AGI stage, or we're very far from that. So still exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you wish like investors just appreciated more about realities of building an AI today?
I mean, I think investors are pretty aware by now, right? Like they've spent enough time to see a bit of all of that. No, I'm like very fortunate to like meeting investors who actually are interested in like applying AI to the physical world and come with an open mind with that. So yeah, not so much to fix on the investor side.
Yeah,
That's awesome. Yeah. And Zach, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can people follow you and stay up to date with Quintess AI?
Yeah, so people can follow me on LinkedIn, at Quintess.ai. Yeah, I try to post more about our journey. Yeah, we are also hiring at the time. So if there are great engineers who want to work with us in San Francisco, that'd be awesome.
That's awesome. And we are super thrilled to be on board as an investor in Quintess AI. It's been awesome to watch you guys grow. And fun fact for all of our listeners is that this is the first investment that we made out of our fund too. So very high conviction to rip off the Band-Aid with that first one. So yeah.
We are very happy to have your support, and it's been very fun working with you guys.
I always love doing this with portfolio founders because we get to hear more from them than we typically do on short update calls and things like that. Learn more about you as a human as well. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for being on, Zach.
Thanks.
That was such a fun conversation. Love having portfolio founders on. Amber, what stood out to you from today's convo?
Yeah, it was a great one. I think number one, I love how niche his focus area is. And obviously I like it because we invested in it. But one of the reasons we invested in it was, he's picked a nuanced space that only he could understand at Quintess. And there might be a few others that could do it, but very few people have spent so long in the industry that they're tackling. And, understanding maintenance and repair operations and having worked in multiple industries where that is a major factor goes a long way, especially in him being able to speak their language. And then the other thing that stuck out to me was his deep dual experience. And what I mean by that is, as you and I talk about all the time, Rachel, we're looking for founders not just with venture scale tech experience and having been inside of tech companies, but also with experience inside of legacy industries. And it's really hard to get to because some people spend their entire careers in one or the other. But we've backed founders who have grown up on farms and then they end up studying machine learning and working at tech companies. But I just think Zach is the perfect example. And it's hard to find somebody that's done so much of both in one career. But, he spent a decade, working in maintenance and repair, most of which was in the rail industry, and then a decade in tech, still working in maintenance and repair. And I just think it's important because if you only have experience working inside of tech companies, you might build something really cool, but have a lot of trouble selling it into the customer base you're trying to target if you're going after these industrial sectors. And then if you've only had experience in the industrial sectors, you might end up building something too small or not be thinking big enough in terms of the venture scale opportunity. So, and of course, you can do things to adjust if you have more of one experience or the other, but it was just really interesting with Zach. It's 50-50. Totally. Truly fits the model we're looking for.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think he talked a lot about the tie-in from the tech world to the physical world throughout the conversation, and just even the practicality of voice AI, just given his experience in working so deeply in this. And when he talked about hey, these people are working with heavy machinery, or they have dirty gloves, they would have to go and take off their gloves, wash their hands, and then input something into a computer or into some mobile app or something like that. And so voice AI just naturally becomes the right product fit for this type of workflow. So you really kind of only get that insight when you have that lived experience, I think.
Totally. And then the last piece that, we actually don't talk about often, but I've thought about multiple times is sort of what's going on for these operators turned founders. It's sort of a different experience and different life that they're living than a founder that might have just graduated college or just dropped out of college to start their startup. And I think, because we've kind of glorified, a small group of founders like Mark Zuckerberg, who just went straight into founding Facebook while he was at Harvard and did great. I think sometimes people get in their heads about, am I too old to be a founder? Do I have too much experience to be a founder? And even investors are should I only go after these people who just graduated college because they have all these fresh ideas and they can take a risk because they're so young? But it's almost like these operators that spend 10 plus years building as an operator inside of a company and then go found a company, get this second wave of risk-taking ability where it's they have their certain things in their life that feel settled, or their financial stability, but they feel these things are in place, so now I can go take that big bet on myself. And it's just a little bit different than the bet that you would take on yourself, if you're just graduated college and you're going to be couch surfing and taking that bet on yourself. But I think the type of founders we back, because we look for first builders, they just have a different set of super skills. They've got a deep network, they've got lots of insights that are super niche in the areas that they're building in, and they've got, the financial stability to be able to bet on themselves in a different way. So I thought that was interesting. He mentioned it just briefly.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's definitely some tie-ins where if we look across our portfolio founders and the type of first builders that we've been backing.
Yeah. And I mean, even you and I mean, this is first time
Yeah,
I've worked
that's
for
true.
myself, like over 10 years into my career. So very cool.
Yeah. Same thing here. So, well, if you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to leave us a review, share it with a friend, and subscribe to First Builders wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Council newsletter for more founder stories and insights delivered straight to your inbox.
Awesome. See you all next time.